Let's go ahead and get started on today's work session, which is a singular item. It's a discussion of the 2018-19 fiscal budget. That's the only item on the agenda. I'll entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Manager Ferguson?
Yeah, good evening. So just the first item, just to discuss briefly, Kelly sent out this afternoon an updated version of the document that went out yesterday that consolidates some of the answers into about 52 pages. So if you don't have that, there's a hard copy in front of you. So just if you want to refer to a document, it's probably easier to do it off that one since it's numbered and consistent. Tonight is the work session. Just as a reminder, the public hearing is scheduled for the next regularly scheduled board meeting. So that occurs as part of the regular meeting and is advertised for the statutorily required public hearing for public input and feedback. This is tonight just a general work session, so we're following up on anything that we prepared over the last few days as far as answers. One thing that we would suggest that the board should spend some time on tonight is talking about the strategic big picture items that are included as part of the proposed budget and get some feedback and direction and dialogue as far as what those look like as they're proposed. And then if there are adjustments that need to be made to those, I think what we're hoping to hear is dialogue and feedback and suggestions. We're prepared to move forward with that and then take some input and go from there. So with that, just to recap a number of the strategic things that are part of the budget this year as proposed, really go back to work effort that began in August of 2017 as far as looking at what the capital needs of the town are over an extended period of time. And as you recall, the capital program and the capital budget that the town had traditionally adopted was 1 year in nature, and so projects had been fairly small in their scope. They've been smaller in their cost and generally could be achieved in a 12-month to 18-month period. In a lot of cases, they didn't cross calendar years, and the planning and design and number of components were smaller and less significant. As we've transitioned to a larger community, the needs are certainly growing, and the needs as identified several years ago through some work that was done with the COG was, a very large list up into tens and hundreds of millions, over $100 million at one point of capital needs, depending on how you define capital, that could be needed over the next 10-year period. The efforts since last August have really said, let's focus on what can be more achievable and doable, because what is in one sense a wish list may not be a realistic list. So the efforts that started in August really were centered around what will the community need over the next 5 to 7 years, how would the community pay for that, what's an acceptable level of investment in the community, and really what are the options. So we've spent significant time in the last year really looking at how a program could be constructed. What does that mean? What components are pay-as-you-go? What components could be debt supported? If components are debt supported, what type of debt is that? What are the mechanics for that? Under North Carolina law, what are our options? So we've taken opportunities twice to look at the structure of how a CIP would be set up. We've taken an option twice in the last, or opportunity twice in the last 12 months to really talk about North Carolina approved debt instruments and how those are achieved, and really focused on the two that we have as options, which are essentially bank debt and debt that's taken to the voters in form of general obligation referendum, which takes a longer planning and spin-up period. So those are really the two things that are on the table from a long-term capital standpoint, two types of debt, and then a pay-as-you-go program. And so what we've looked at starting in August, again in January, looking at some CIP projects, and then following up in February with Davenport is there's a component of a CIP program that could be pay-as-you-go, and there's a component that really needs to focus on debt and its appropriateness and its type. And so that's the place that we are as a community is the board really ready to look at that strategic way to address capital needs and what's the right mix for the community. So built into this budget this year, there's really two significant things that I would call strategic planning. One is a way to get to a long-term capital program, and that's funded with an underpinning of investing $650,000 a year as an ongoing investment in the capital program. If you'll think back to page 27 and 28 of the document that Davenport presented, there's some charts there that really shows what happens if you continue to put $650,000 into that capital planning program. And then when you start getting ready to either issue debt or use pay-as-you-go, the results of how that can be structured, and whether it's a $4, $5, $6 million, $7 million capital investment to be made down the road, it really is structured around the underpinning of continuing to invest $650,000 as we did last year in capital programs. Last year it was structured in two ways. It was structured $350,000 went toward the YMCA project, and another $300 went toward another capital project. And so the simple investment practice there would be to continue that, but to use that as being a key foundation of the CIP program. So you'll notice in the recommended budget as it was presented, that's a fundamental building block of a CIP program. The second thing that we focus on this year really is a way to address those projects that are more tactical in nature and are really transportation or transportation related in their specificity. And then how do you pay for those if you've got a project that's 12 months to 18 months to 24 months in duration and really has significant impact on an intersection or a turn lane or a piece of sidewalk. It's not a 5 to 7 year process. It's really tactical in nature. It can be accomplished fairly quickly in a construction phase. So are those things that you're going to issue debt for? And we would submit no. Those don't need to be considered as part of a debt program, but they do need to be considered as part of your capital investment program over a long period of time as a routine matter of practice. So those two components really make up two of the key pillars of the recommended budget this year as it was proposed. Look at your long-term capital with the CIP program, and then look at the shorter-term capital investment with the STP program. Those are two tools. They really allow the board to have the flexibility to insert and remove projects as you feel are necessary. So, for example, the CIP program absolutely can be adjusted on a yearly basis, and it is recommended that you look at it every year, and your coming year reflects the priorities that you're going to have to pay for. But you also need to think about those priorities that are going to be requiring debt or some other type of capital investment in an out year. So just because we don't have to pay for it this year doesn't mean that we don't need to think about how we're going to pay for it in year number 3. So that's the value really of the CIP program as opposed to the STP type program, which is where's an intersection that we can spend $200,000 on and have immediate benefit on the day that it opens. Two different pieces, one long-term, one more tactical and strategic in nature. Those are the two really premises that the budget this year is built on. It's an operating budget that continues the service level that has been achieved over time. One thing that's really significant this year that I think has been successful, and we've highlighted briefly but really has not been talked about a lot, is recycling implementation. That went into effect in February. That does impact the coming budget because costs have increased, so that is built into the budget as presented. We've had a lot of positive feedback with that response to a request that was continual in nature as far as we'd like larger cans and the ability to recycle more. So to the town's credit, the town approached that and stepped up to it and has really made that a service level that's really admirable. The two parts there, the capital and the STP, really relate to how do you sustain the growth in the town over time. The way that the solid waste fee or contract is set up right now, we have an escalating growth factor that's built in on two parts. One really is every new house that comes in town uses more than they're paying for as far as their tax bill. So we've got about $217 or $218 a year that are a cost factor per house. And so the tax bill as it's currently set up covers that entire amount. The solid waste service, the recycling service, the yard debris service, and then the white goods services provided here is really at the very, very high end of service levels for communities in North Carolina. So there may be a community that provides something comparable, but there's very few out there that are doing it at the same level that we are. Curbside leaf pickup, vacuumed on the curb has started to trend away in North Carolina for a lot of reasons, but it's a high service level. White good pickup policy that's in place right now a couple times a year with no fee, that's not necessarily typical of every community where they might have a fee for service model for that particular service. So the model as it's set up right now is not very sustainable long term. We have looked at other communities in our size and range, and a lot of those communities have utilized the tool that is authorized by state law. It's not anything that's new. In fact, in Waxhaw we had it for a number of years, and that's a solid waste fee. So we've suggested this year that we put that back in place, and it simply will defray about 1/3 of the cost, but it's not going to cover the entire cost of providing the full array of services that are associated with single-family residential.
What would be the equivalent tax increase in a tax bill to cover that?
I think it's about 2.5.
2.5 pennies? Thank you.
So that is part of the recommended budget. It's a decision the board will have to make. So on the long-term planning side, the two strategic pieces of CIP and STP. On the fee revenue, new revenue side, there's two pieces that are recommended: the solid waste fee and then also the vehicle fee, both of which are existing tools under North Carolina law. They're not tools that we would need to lobby for or convince the legislature that they need to be enacted. These are tools that exist today. In one case, it is completely restricted as to usage, or partially restricted as to usage. The vehicle fee is restricted in the following manner. $20 must be used for transportation purpose and is restricted by law to that. $5 can be used for any authorized purpose that you're authorized under state law to provide. So there's the last $5, any other municipal thing that you're given power to do, you could do. Our recommendation is that the 25 be completely and 100% restricted to transportation and reserved for that. Essentially, if you want to look at that particular revenue, it's a user fee. If you use a car, you pay a fee to help with the transportation system. It's directly linked. It's proposed to be reserved. It's fairly transparent. So that's the linkage there. In a nutshell, those are the four components. You've got the two capital planning type items, and you got two revenue items, and those are really, when you net out the budget this year, the big strategic items over the long term that we're putting in front of the board for your discussion and feedback. We've got some other items we'd like to address later as far as getting some feedback and direction on as well, but these are the four big ones for tonight.
When you say vehicle fee for the vehicles to $25, and you say it's for transportation, now, what's included in that transportation? Are you talking roads? Are you talking sidewalks? Are you talking lights? Are you talking, what are you talking about? What are the people, what would they get with that $25 fee?
Okay, so the program would be restricted revenue, which means it goes into a fund that cannot be spent for any other public use. And it has to be used for the following type programs. You have to be used on roads, it have to be used on sidewalks or things that are associated with sidewalks, be used on turn lanes, so horizontal and vertical, so you could have a turn signal that could be used with an associated project, but it has to be transportation in nature. It can't be any other type of municipal expense.
So
And-
just let me add on to that, because I want to get clarity. Correct me if I'm wrong, but in part of this, it complements the Powell bill. Powell bill can be used on any state road, any road in the town, whereas the vehicle fee is town's public roads, not state roads. So it's our infrastructure, the 40 miles that we have, and we currently don't have a fund to use on.
Yeah, and not to overly complicate it, but the staff is going to be responsible for keeping track on what type of expenditure is eligible under which particular transportation fund.
Right.
And you have two, as the mayor pointed out, you would have a Powell bill fund, and you'd have a transportation reserve fund. And our responsibility is to make sure things are get coded correctly. The dollar figures, the board's going to have to decide which projects are actually funded. So you would continue to have a maintenance program, so you're maintaining roads, you're paving roads, and then you'd have the ability to designate other projects, whether they're on town roads or on state roads, for transportation reserve or STP type projects. So whether it's a turn lane on a town road or a turn lane on a state road, we would come back to you with a recommended funding source that would be one of those two, either Powell bill or it's going to be out of the STP.
So this funding source, the $25 fee that you're talking about, is not something or money that we would be getting from the North Carolina DOT. This is strictly just for the town roads that we have to maintain as a town, and that we don't have any other funds or monies that can be put towards that except for this fee? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the Powell bill money comes from the state of North Carolina, and it's based on two factors: your number of road miles that you have, town roads in town, and your population. And there's a formula, 75-25 formula, that dictates what that dollar figure is. Really, the only way you can change it is you can grow your population, or you can add road miles to your town system. That changes the number. The gas tax has some impact on that number too, so if the state doesn't collect as much as they collected in the year before, it can pull the number down. But there's a set formula for that. The $25 per vehicle is levied per vehicle that's in the jurisdiction. It is added to your DMV bill, so when you get your registration, which also now has your town and county tax information on there, it's added to that, collected there, remitted directly to the municipality.
And how have the roads, I'm sorry if I'm taking, how have the roads been maintained before without this vehicle fee? How have they been maintained? How have they been maintained?
Well, I think you could argue that some have not been maintained, and there are some that have been maintained to a standard of what we have on hand. So you have this year several $100,000, around 300 or so, that's been spent only from Powell bill to maintain town roads. What we're not addressing, quite frankly, is anything that happens on the state roads, with a few exceptions. One exception this year is what's happening long-term at 16 and Gray Byram, as far as the installation of turn lanes by the state, and then additional funds that go toward turn signals by the town. So that's one kind of exception where the town has stepped forward to make an investment on a state-maintained facility. But by and large, the town has only been working on the town system, and there's a lot of roads that are on the list that we're moving through slowly and deliberately, but generally a road's going to need to be repaid about every 15 years. Some are paved better than others and may hold up longer depending on the amount of volume and type of traffic, but 15 to 20 years is the life cycle of a lot of these roads, and we don't have a funding source in place right now from the Powell bill that fully addresses that. This particular STP fund won't address that. There's a systemic problem as far as statewide Powell bill funds versus the number of municipal roads the town's already maintained, and that's not going to be addressed here or elsewhere without addressing the overall Powell bill structure. But that reflects the state of transportation and funding in North Carolina, which is somewhere around a $50 to $60 billion shortfall. That's nothing that we're going to chip away at. What we're talking really about is smaller investments that can be noticed and appreciated as far as making the daily traffic flow better, whether it's a turn lane, a traffic signal, 3 lanes versus 2 lanes, those smaller items there.
I need to clarify something too about the motor vehicle fee. So when we say motor vehicle fee, that's the $25. So in the chart that we had last week and the chart that's right here on this page, this is general fund. The motor vehicle fee will be in the STP fund, totally separate fund, totally restricted. This $650,000 motor vehicle tax is your property tax. It's not new. It's always been there. It's going to continue to be on your tax bill. That's not, that $650,000 is general fund money. Has nothing to do with the new fee. So the new fees are the $304,000 that would be proposed to be in the STP fund, restricted. And then the other new fee is $429,000 in the general fund. So altogether, the new fees are $733,000.
Can I ask, didn't we just approve a road paving recently? The cyclical road paving, repaving of our roads? Where did that money come from?
Powell bill.
Okay. Will we not be getting Powell bill money?
We get $323,000.
Okay, which is why we have that rotating schedule that we're working through of getting through the roads. Okay.
So before we take over a road, it has to be, for DOT, it has to be brought to standard, correct, before we take it over?
Correct.
So that would be, each one we take over is at standard, and it would be 15 years before we would have to do it again.
For new roads that we take over from this point forward, what it doesn't really address is roads that have been taken over since early, pick a point, but since
Prior to 2011, 2012.
I have the same problem with this that I've mentioned every time this has come up so far, is that this is a regressive tax. This is going to hit the poorest in our community the hardest. And I've asked before if there was a way to scale it, and you said no. So you're talking about us adding a fee that is a flat fee, that the poorest are going to be hit the hardest, and I'm not in favor of doing that. Just to get my opinion out there.
So without this being put in place, how then would we be able to take care of the road system or traffic or turning lanes? How would that happen without this fee? It's $25.
So the current revenue coming from Powell bill is roughly $320,000 a year, and that amount should remain fairly steady and grow gradually over time. But that's going to be the limiting factor as to, unless the state changes the formula or there's a massive number of roads that we take over and the population growth increases dramatically, the amount will be 300 plus some. But there's not another revenue stream that is there to say you can divert money to roads, to address roads.
And this
You
25.
could divert money from anything to address them, but you're dealing with the general fund, so really it's a net, it's a dollar figure that's got, if you take from one place,
Well, that's what would happen with Kensington.
These become
One-
part of the capital projects that we would look at then, basically. We're looking at it saying we have to pull this money from the general fund to do X project, yes?
yeah, under a pay-as-you-go project, and Kensington would be one. There was a large fund balance appropriation, which took 1.2,
Well, originally 1.4.
1.4 out of fund balance. So basically, that project was paid for out of savings, largest part of it, not out of operating. So to differentiate,
But understand the complexity, to your point about roads failing. That was fix it or close it. That's the position the town was in, because the county said, You either close it or fix it, because they had a piece of that in there. So that was an instance where we had to take it. It wasn't a planned capital project. It was, you know, a critical, perceived to be a critical need given the amount of traffic that was on it. And those things can happen. I mean, the contingency stuff can happen. And we've now addressed the general fund with the policy of saying no more, don't go below 34%, 30 to 40%, which, and we're at that point. So, and that's the crux of the issue right now. We don't have any place, we don't have a savings account to take it from, correct?
So the policy that the board approved means that you've established a range to keep the town in a healthy position. But if you violated that and go below, and went below it for some reason, then that starts to erode that healthy position. And it also takes away your rainy day fund that the state wants you to have in place to address emergencies. So if in this community a road caved in, like has happened in other communities because it was improperly built and somebody didn't catch it for whatever reason, or if a utility company impacted it and they had major erosion underneath the road and the town and the community went to court or odds against their various positions, you got to fix the road. So the state requires and sets a bottom limit for us, but then it acknowledges that you'll need more than just the minimum. And so the board here wisely picked a range that works for a community of our size, and that is our healthy range. But we are in the middle of that range, and being in the middle of that range means that we can't take from savings in the future without building the savings up. So one-time appropriations out of savings to fix roads or buy property or construct facilities, those options are not on the table. And it doesn't mean that that's a bad thing. It just means that's where we're at as a community, and we're still in good shape. But you don't have as many options today from a funding standpoint as you might have had 4 years ago. And it really just comes down to dollars
So this
and needs.
So this is then a one-time yearly fee that you're talking about?
Correct.
Annual, I'm sorry.
So
One-time
when you
annual
go to
fee.
renew your
Like-
vehicle at the DMV,
It would be
It's on
included
there.
within that?
Mhm.
Okay.
Per car.
per car.
And just to add a little clarity to your comment about Powell Bill, because I've spent some time with DOT on this. Number one, they've gone forward to the legislature for, I think it's a Build North Carolina bond. Does not look like it will go through the legislature this year, but next year. But they're trying to free up $3.2 billion additional funds because of the big gap that you mentioned. That takes it out of federal allocation and all the bureaucracy that goes with it, so they can get at some of the roads. They perceive the gap. They've also said that the gas tax has to be reworked. That'll get reworked with the census, so we're really not looking at much of a Powell bill increase until 2021, 2022, or decrease, depending upon where the gas tax goes and how successful they are with the bond. So there's lots of moving pieces here more than anything
That was my
else.
next question, is how often or if the Powell bill is increased?
Well, like Greg said, it's 75% population, 25% your miles. So on ours, our population is historically about 2,000, 2,500 less than what we think it is, what Todd counts through garbage cans, waste cans. And the only way to fix that is if we spend $250,000 to go do a census, but given where we are with 2020 right around the corner, that doesn't make sense. So as Greg said, you might get a few $1,000, maybe $10,000, $15,000 over the next couple of years, but we're not going to get much more than that. And our mileage isn't that incremental. I mean, regardless of where everybody landed, Grove Manor barely adds a mile to it. I mean, as a for instance, and that doesn't appreciably at 25% add much to their calculation.
Greg, can I ask you, you said that you did research on towns of comparable size, and that they had, you said 80% of the ones you looked at had this fee. What are the tax rates in these towns that you've looked at? That's what I want to compare, because if we're charging substantially more in property taxes, well, then it makes sense to me. They have a lower tax rate, they're going to make it up in a fee. But if the situation is different, then that affects the calculus. So can you please enlighten me on that?
Yeah, fair point. They're all over the place. And Kelly may want to.
I think that research was on the solid waste fee. All municipalities.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Solid waste, sorry.
But just to clarify that, all municipalities have to send in their financial statements to the state.
Mm-hmm.
The state then consolidates all that financial data. It's called the AFIR, A-F-I-R, and you can go on the state website and look at everyone's financials.
Excuse me.
And so Kelly did some research on that and pulled all the municipalities that are our size and whether or not they had a solid waste fee.
Okay.
So
do we have any information as far as vehicle taxes then that we could look at?
we don't have that research done.
I could give you an anecdotal one. I met with the mayor of Clayton, 21,000 in population. I serve on a board with them. We were talking about this. Their tax rate is 57 cents. Their vehicle fee is being raised to $30 from $5. They see no other alternative to fund the local roads because of the crunch on the shortfall at the state level. So they are going with bumping their vehicle fee from $5 to $30 and bumping their tax rate up three pennies this year. And it was primarily due to transportation, a couple other services on the tax rate. But and again, that's one anecdote. I don't profess that to be a scientific study, but since he was there, I asked him.
So outside of the road system inside the city, how bad are our roads on a percentage that we need to fix now, not counting Kensington?
Outside of the road, the
I mean-
boundary, the town boundaries, or the,
Within the town boundaries,
So-
how really bad are the roads that we need to fix now, other than Kensington? Is it a lot, are there a lot of roads? I mean, I'm around town a lot, I don't know. What are the problems, I guess is what I'm asking.
so we are currently studying the Waxhaw-Marvin corridor. And that study is going to come back with some definite recommendations as to what to do on that corridor. That will be one answer to that question, which is, as that street or road continues to carry parallel traffic to 16 now and in the future as 16 is widened, what should it look like and how should it function? I think, without speculating as to what it might say, we know that there's going to be some recommendations up and down that road for improvement. Don't necessarily know exactly all of those, but we know that there'll be some definite recommendations. They're not going to say it looks and flows well. Likewise, we've got other roads all over town that they're substandard. I mean, they just are substandard. A lot of those substandard roads are south of downtown, south of Main Street. They don't have adequate width. They don't have drainage systems. The structure itself is deficient because it was not built to carry FedEx trucks. It was built as a gravel road, and somebody paved it at some point, and then it got paved again, and it's just not structurally sound. So over time, all those streets will have to be rebuilt in some sort of prioritized fashion. So I think we're all familiar with maybe intersections that we think, from a non-engineering standpoint, if this had a turn lane, it'd work better, or if it had better sight distance, or if it had a different elevation, it'd be more safe. But there's some analysis to be done, quite frankly, with both the STP and the CIP program over time. The STP, we identified 10 examples, is what we'll call them, that are not by any means weighted or anything other than these are examples of type of projects that could be done. It doesn't mean that the board would adopt any of those 10 or all of those 10 or 9 or 13, but that's the type of project that could be done. We could probably come up with another 8 or 10 other places in town that could be on that list too, and I'm sure each of you probably have some. But I think there's plenty, to get to the question, there's plenty of opportunity for public investment around intersections that exist today, and then in the future, as we see development come and they're required to make investment, there may be things that the town can step up and do, like the Kensington and Waxhaw Marvin traffic signal and intersection improvements, where if there is a funding source for it, the town will be more inclined to go ahead and make what might be a harder decision to go ahead and make a long-term capital investment if there's a funding mechanism. If it's not, it's a lot more easy just to go and say no and not think long-term.
Well, to Commissioner Burns' question, I went and did some digging, and I perused our website, went back and found the financial management plan that the COG put together for us in March 2015, and their recommendation, they highlighted the hole we have in transportation planning, and they suggested very strongly to set up a fund. And they used the industry standards or the regional standards. We need to be refurbishing 4 miles of roads, minimum 4 miles per year in roads, and replacing a minimum of 2 miles of roads per year. So 6 miles of roads need to be enhanced every year at the then size, let alone where we are now. And then when you look at Powell bill, basically gives us what, $7,000 a mile, in terms of for funding, and the state average is at 64,000 miles at the DOT level. So I don't know what the math is, what it costs to refurbish a road versus rebuild a road. I do know that the Kensington road took up $1.2 million, and that is 1.2 miles. We haven't even finished it yet. So we get into refurbish or replace, and we're supposed to be doing 4+1 or 4+2. We're not even funding what the original recommendation was. Not saying we should. I'm just saying we do have a shortfall. And I don't know how accurate that has been. That was the recommendation that they gave the then board back in March of 2015 that I was able to find.
A question for you. Adding to what you're saying, there was a time 2 years ago the town started to put in place standards for design, construction, acceptance, and inspections and so forth. But prior to that time, there was an awful lot of roads built for public acceptance that I think are substandard, and they're even, not just south of the tracks. They're north of the tracks. They're in Lawson, they're in Curitan, they're in Anklin Forest. They're all around. And that is a lump of money that could be sitting out there waiting to happen that's going to really throw off the Powell bill, the STP, and everything else. I think it's a serious problem that we haven't quite identified. So having said that the transportation is a #1 priority, it's a real priority. It's something that could harm the town badly, because when roads start to fall apart, people will be looking to us to fix them, looking to the town to fix them. And I don't know that you have enough money in this budget now to do that, but I know that you're getting a handle on it. So keep getting the handle on it. Let's identify it as we move forward.
Commissioner Wesley?
With the transportation being the biggest concern among residents, that's what we constantly hear. I feel like we need to have a strategic plan in place for that. And I know that there's some concern about how this would hit the lower income. And I've looked at numbers. If we shifted and did a 3-penny tax or something like that, yes, it might affect the wealthier. They may be paying more than the lower income, but I do like the idea of a fee over raised taxes, just because it has to be spent on the roads, whereas if we do the tax, then it goes into the general fund and it could be basically spread anywhere, correct? Is that basically?
That's correct, unless you then restrict it every year a certain amount. You can do that. You can commit some fund balance to that, but then
But you can unrestrict it just as
you
easily.
can uncommit it the next month if you wanted to, yeah.
And in a way, you know, it could be that wealthier may have 3 to 4 cars in their homes, depending on how many children they have. So, I mean, I don't know if that would, how that would balance out an income level, but I just, to me, I think I like the fee idea better than the taxes, knowing that that will go for the roads.
So did we take a straw poll here? Or well, I mean, they need
Yeah.
direction.
They need direction.
Yeah. So what's the
Not
straw?
in favor of raising fees on the people.
Just go, Mayor Pro Tem, 4? No, we're just going to go around.
For the, are we talking
Just the vehicle.
just the vehicle fee? Now, this vehicle, just another question. The vehicle fee that you're talking about, we're not talking about things that we just need to fix the roads for now. Are we looking long-term? Are we talking future? Are we talking, you know, this fee is going to encompass all of that, some of that, none of that?
So the program would be in place as long as you have a funding source. So the board would identify a funding source, and then you would identify projects that you would want to put on the list. And the program would be shorter term and tactical in nature, so that you don't put projects on there that would cost $1 million. These would be projects that would be 150 to 300. Smaller projects. And as long as there's a fund balance and there's funding, then you have a program. If the fee was discontinued, or for some reason you wanted to end a program, you could. But the fees that were there in the fund would go toward road projects, transportation projects, until they were expended.
Okay, and when we say transportation, I just want to make sure we're not just talking fixing roads. We're talking fixing sidewalks. Are we talking widening roads as well? Could that possibly be used in there too, to eliminate, or not eliminate, but alleviate some of the traffic congestion that we have now? So is that all encompassed in this?
Under transportation, a general definition, you can use it on sidewalks, because that is transportation. It's pedestrian transportation. You could use it on other enhancements to the road, whether it's widening the roadway, adding a turn lane to the roadway, adding turning signals to the roadway. Those things would also qualify.
Waiting for me now?
Yeah.
Okay. If that's going to help with our traffic congestion that we have, if that's going to help with the roadways, that's going to help, you know, fix the roads and some of that, and it's just a yearly fee, which adds up to maybe $2 or so a month for people, you're talking 25, then to help with that traffic, then I think that that would be, you know, something that would be good for the town.
Well, I've weighed the pros and cons, and looking at the budget and going through as we all have, I'm not in favor of adding a tax, which is really what it is, to the people. I think before we do that and make the decision, even though I know that the roads are a very important thing, I've seen, for example, the roads in Hillcrest are in horrible condition, but they've been that way for 30 years, or probably more. And we've spent and spent and spent. And I think in looking at all of these numbers and the financial impact, is that we need to tighten our belt a little bit more before we charge more taxes to the people. So I'm not in favor of that.
I've always believed that there are 3 things you have to do before you even consider raising taxes on the people, which is what a fee is like this. Cut your budget, cut your budget, cut your budget. There is too much in here that we need to be responsible fiscally taking out before we are asking for more from our taxpayers. So no, I'm not in favor of it.
Commissioner Westlake?
I believe we did cut 200,000 from the budget, is that correct? So there,
Yeah.
so there has been cutting. I just, again, go back to, you know, what is it that the people constantly complain about, constantly ask for relief on, and that's the road congestion. And this is a tool that the state has given us to do, and that this is something we need to do for our planning for the future.
Commissioner Burrow?
Yeah, I'm in favor of it also for the same reasons.
May I just ask one more question? Now, Commissioner Burns and Lee have stated that we need to tighten our belt and cut from the budget. Now, if we make these budget cuts, whatever they may be, and if we tighten our belt even in cutting funds from the budget, is that going to help with the process that we need to fix the roads? Is that going to help alleviate some of the traffic, sidewalks? Is that going to help moving forward? Do you see that as being helpful? To try and cut and tighten, is that going to help us without this fee that you need?
Well, savings are good. So anytime there are savings identified, we would say that's great.
But would the savings be enough to do what is needed for the town?
Well, I think that the devil is in the detail, so it really gets down to where are the savings coming from or proposed to come from. There are certain areas that we have restrictions, so if we don't spend money on a certain type of expenditure, it can't be diverted to another fund. An example would be, you could not spend money in the building inspection department, but we cannot use that money for parks. Building inspection fees have to go back to that program. So while there can be individual savings identified and they're good overall, really it's dependent upon where the savings come from and what fund they sit in and then what they can be used for. So anything that's general fund in nature that doesn't have a restriction can have a benefit across the town, but if it's restricted in nature in any way, then you've got to keep it. For example, cemetery now is a fund, so we won't take money in the coming year from the cemetery and put it back over into another operation. It'll stay in the cemetery fund. Powell bill, by law, has to stay in the Powell bill fund. Fees that are generated by parks, you could divert fees from parks to other uses, but you can't divert fees from building inspections to parks.
Comment, please. I think we need to make a distinction between what's a cut and what's a savings, for one. And as you talk about these things, what are they that you're thinking that you have found in the budget that could be saved or cut? I mean, at our last meeting, the staff told us that they had gone through this very, very carefully and had found, I forget how much it was that you said that you saved. What is it that you're proposing that gets cut out of this budget?
That's why we have these meetings, though, so we
Right.
can go through that.
So straw person wise, 3 up, 2 against. So that gives you adequate direction to move forward on that? What was the next one? Help me.
That was the vehicle.
Right.
The other thing I think has been discussed is the solid waste fee, whether that's structured as a fee, whether it's structured as increase in the tax rate, how that's set about, whether the amount's right. There's all kind of variables. But what we proposed, again, was reestablishing what was there a couple years ago, which was $80 annual, to defray about a third of the costs for the program as it currently exists.
So,
We'll start at that end this time.
Okay. Personally, whether it's a fee or a tax is sort of immaterial to me, but one of the things I think that stuck in my mind was correct me if I'm wrong, the $217 fee per household for the services that we get. I think that the same services that the town gets for 217 would probably equate to $300, $400, $500 worth of service if we had to contract for them individually. And I don't think that would be a good thing. I'm fine with either the $80 or raising it as a tax. Quite frankly, if you get $217 worth of service, I'm willing to pay for it. My wife might disagree, but I'm willing to pay for it. I think we should.
Commissioner Westlake.
I mean, this is one that I'm struggling with a little bit more, only because when I see people online talking about what you get from your town taxes, everybody immediately throws out the garbage. You get garbage with your taxes. So
You get garbage picked up. You don't get garbage with the tax.
Exactly.
Sometimes you
It's
do.
just,
Sometimes you do.
Yeah, I just want to I'd like to listen to what some other commissioners have to say here on this.
This is the one I meant to ask for the research, where you had the towns and you could compare the tax rate to the fee and everything. Can we get a little more discussion on that, since this was the fee apparently that I was mixing up in my head?
So you're gonna have two things going on across the state. One is you're gonna have very different tax rates all over the state. Some are gonna be much higher than we are. Some will be lower than we are. The second thing that's gonna happen is you're gonna have levels of service that vary from almost no municipal service at all to a full service city. And so the devil again is in the details about comparing what does the community provide. Just to go back as a trivia, the one thing that we're actually required as a community to provide is not police, it's not fire, it's not trash, it's not streets, it's building inspections. Most communities don't do that themselves. As far as a town or a city, they contract with their county to do it. If it's a bigger city, sometimes they do it, but we've got a lot of examples in this county of communities that don't really provide a lot of service. And so they could have a fee or not have a fee, or so again, when we talk about averages across the state, you really have to kind of take it on face value as it's an average, because if there's 80 communities, you really almost have to look at how each of the 80 provide service. Are they provided police by the sheriff, or do they do it in-house? Fire, is it volunteer or is it municipal? Trash, do you get it picked up on your own because it's a free-for-all and you've got 6 different trash companies coming down your street because you have that freedom of choice? Or is there some regulation and thought process to it and the town awards a franchise and negotiates a lower price at a better price point? So that's where it's really difficult. So, you know, on average, it's roughly 80% are in that category of, yeah, we charge a fee. And then if you look at that, more than half of them are charging the full cost.
But you're using that as a statistical argument for why we should do this. So I'm asking you, of those 80%, are they on average charging the same property tax as us, more or less?
I'm not using it as an argument that says we need to do it. It's an information to say, for your information, it happens across the state. I think our situation locally has got to be judged on the merits of what does the service cost, how do you want to provide it, and how do you want to pay for it. All these answers in these communities are the right answer for their community. The board has to decide what the right answer is for this community. We're not comparing ourselves to any one specific community, just that's a general information. Across North Carolina, it's used.
So 400 communities across the state, basically.
In this, I don't want to give a number, but in our category, in our size category, yeah.
One could assume going larger, it's probably true as well. But, okay.
But we're not going to compare, so that piece of information can just go out the window because it doesn't relate to anything then. So then I'm just going to make my decisions based on our town and not consider whether others do or not.
Mayor, maybe you can help me with remembering. Now, it was 2014 or 13 that the board implemented the $80? 14?
Would have been 14. It went from 40 to 80.
So we did 14 and 15.
Right. And then in
And
16,
then last
the revamp.
year, we took it away.
Correct.
So what was the reasoning for taking it away? Not doing it anymore? Or is this the reason we're wanting to do it again is because of the recycling? Is that the bump that made you decide we need to put this back in place or not?
There's a couple things that happen, I think, and Lisa may want to speak to it as well, but there are increased costs because the service level is different today than it was 2 years ago. Without a doubt, there's a cost associated with a higher level, which is requested. If you ask public services about that, they'll tell you that they got that request all the time to have containers with lids that didn't blow down the street and higher capacity. The town heard it and responded, but there's a cost associated. The second part is I don't know what was in the mind of the folks who said we would discontinue the fee, but there was a revaluation going on, and it appears that there was a thought process that we would add to the tax rate and do away with the fee.
It didn't cover.
It didn't work out.
That is exactly what Warren.
It did not work in that manner. No stones to be thrown, but it's not a precise science when you start guessing what revaluation is going to give you. Mecklenburg County is a good example of that. So it didn't cover the cost. And then in the meantime, the costs have increased and the number of houses have increased. That's why we would say in our estimation, the current model is not sustainable. Others might have an opinion that it is sustainable, but we just don't think that that's a good model when you have a tool that is related to the cost and again is earmarked for the cost and is going to not exceed the cost. It's going to be always below the cost. So that's the tool that some use, and we would submit as one to be at least considered. The other consideration, certainly costs can be added to the tax rate. The other consideration is service levels can be reduced. We're not saying that there's a particularly right answer, but the service level today is here and the costs are there and the amount to pay for it's down here, and you're competing with any other service that the town provides for funding. So by dedicating a portion in whatever manner, it gets to make it more sustainable.
Well, my concern is, you said this was would cover a third. This amount would cover a third. So if we put this back in place and the cost continues to rise, then we have a tool there that we could say, okay, we're charging $80 a year. Then as the prices go up, then another board might say, well, let's charge $100. We have this tool, or let's charge $120, or let's go up to $150 a year. That could very well happen, and I think it could get out of hand, depending on who's the board and what decisions you make when you put something in place like this.
There was a question asked in the submitted that I didn't understand, so I'm just going to ask a little bit about that right now. Someone had put in a comment about a $300,000 break-even point for houses that pay for their services. Does anyone know what that is about? Because I didn't understand that.
And the staff didn't understand what that meant.
Okay, so we don't, okay.
The other reason why we're proposing a fee in the general fund is because the general fund has been balanced every year for many years with appropriated fund balance, which is your savings. So we did not have a balanced budget. We balanced it by appropriated fund balance, and at some point you're going to have to stop doing that. You can't keep doing that. So some revenue has to come from somewhere to make the budget whole. So you can decide not to do that, and then you have a choice of finding something, as you said, that you can cut. It needs to be $400,000 worth just to balance the budget. And then if you do that, then where are you going to take it? And it would probably have to come from the $650,000 for your CIP. And you would only have $200,000 for any project or CIP.
It's certainly evident, as Greg, as you've said again tonight, that we lose money on residential properties because of the services that we provide, tax-wise, which is the point that I know some of us tried to make previously, that when we consider annexing new homes, we're costing us money every time we do that. So that's just worth mentioning. There is that correlation. Residential homes cost us money. So the more residential homes we have, the more our simply looking at the trash fee is going to go up, 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 up. It's just worth mentioning, I think.
And road improvements.
And roads on those roads, yes, that's true.
Now, even without the increase in homes, or annexations or anything else that's coming in, just basically with fees and stuff that we have, or cost of living or increases, that too can affect the expenses that the town has. Is that correct?
So, sure. I mean, very few costs ever go down. There are a few examples where they do, but most services that are provided by third parties, whether they're trash contracts or paving, generally there's inflation built in, whether it's their cost of materials or their cost of labor or their overhead costs. So over time,
So
there's an inflationary effect on just about everything. We all understand that from a housing standpoint, where houses now cost more.
So this fee that that you would like, not that you're imposing, this fee that you're proposing is based upon inflation, is based upon expenses that have increased, not just because of housing increases, but just some of it is just inflationary?
For the solid waste component, there's two main things that really have taken place. One is you have a different and higher level of service associated with recycling.
Okay.
And the second is there's continued growth in housing. The other is the contract, as you recall, last year for solid waste had increases in it. So there is over time an escalation in cost associated with providing that level of service, and it has an impact.
Now, as Commissioner Burns has already stated, we had this fee in place and it was taken away because I think the board previously was looking at a tax increase. Now, why is this fee, why do you think this fee is better than a tax increase? Or what's the difference between the fee and the tax increase that could be proposed?
So there's various ways to approach it and look at it. And there are those on both sides of this argument. I'll make them both for you. One is that we would rather have it on our property tax bill, and it's one lump sum. It's not broken out separately. There's various reasons for why people might want that. The flip side of that is for those who want to follow exactly where the dollars go. If it says solid waste fee, it's for solid waste. It's not appropriated for something else. So it's a relationship to the service provided. It would actually be broken out on the bill separately, and would be a separate line that would say Waxhaw solid waste fee, and the dollar amount would be on a per household basis for single family dwellings. So for facilities where it's multi-family, so for apartment complexes, they have to have dumpsters. Group homes would have to have dumpsters. Businesses, they've got their own requirements. So these are single-family residential structures.
Now,
Personal preference as far as what individuals might like to see as far as how it's accounted for or charged or displayed.
Now, also, with this, as already was stated, the $80. Now, that is something that could possibly go up, or is that something that the board itself could state if people were in agreement with it, to propose that it does not go up or for a period of time, or?
So the answer is any board in the future could do anything legally under the law. They could charge zero. They could charge the full cost of the service, whatever it is in that particular year. They could charge a portion of the service in that particular year. They can do the same thing with the tax rate. They can, there's statutory limitations on how high a tax rate can get, but there's no guarantee that this board can in some way bind a future board as to what taxes and fees are going to be.
I have another question. You said that we could reduce the services. What would that mean, going back on the recyclable, or is there some other way to reduce the services? What did you mean by that statement?
So there are things that other communities do, and I'll just use these as examples and not as an advocate for any of them. Some communities don't vacuum leaves. They require homeowners to bag the leaves, and they put limits on how many bagged leaves they'll collect. Some communities actually issue a third 96-gallon container, and they require that you put your leaves in the container, and then they will give you a outside allotment of so many more bags that they'll pick up as part of their service. If you own a 5-acre ranchette, they expect that you're able to dispose of your leaves through some other means. So they set their service level at a service level that will accommodate a lot that's a third of an acre in size or a quarter of an acre in size. And so there's a standardized service level, and there are those who fall below it, there's those who fall above it, but that's the service level. Some communities don't provide leaf collection, and you've got to figure out how to haul them off or pay for that. The same thing with white goods. White goods in some communities are completely a private sector function, and if you want it removed, if it's a refrigerator or a portable grill, you call 1-800-JUNK or whoever is the service provider in the market, and that's how it's achieved. So those are two examples: one one solid white goods and one leaves. The same thing with recycling. Frequency is one thing that you can look at, and we're not suggesting that, but that's some communities have cut back recycling as times got tough, and they didn't put necessarily a priority on the environmental part of it. They just looked at it as a cost savings for that particular year. Solid waste, the collection method can actually have an impact on your monthly cost. So there are communities that use completely automated dump and the cart program that goes with that, and they don't have any trucks that are rear feed, rear load with 2 employees on the back or on the sides and a driver. So we have a mixture of that here. But if you go entirely to a one-arm, one-driver truck, that's a more expensive truck, but it's less labor, and there's a cost savings in some cases with that because the labor goes down, but there's also a trade-off that occurs with the service level. And I can guarantee you that you will have two things most likely occur. You'll have a savings in your overall contractual cost, and you'll have a huge spike in your customer complaints. And the reason is the method lends itself to speed. It doesn't lend itself to cleanliness. So if you've got 2 people on the back of the truck and they spill something, generally they pick it up. If you've got a driver in a truck with a one-arm bandit, as it's called in the industry, they dump it. They don't even see it. They don't know if debris is blowing off the back of the truck. They don't know if they sit the cart down, if it landed where it was, or sometimes it lands 30 feet down the street. So there's a certain level of increased customer complaints, but there's absolutely a saving. So there are things that we can do, but you have to go into those changes eyes wide open to understand exactly what you're buying, because it will absolutely change the way service is provided.
With the leaf vacuuming, because we do our own, Do you have an approximate cost of what that costs the town to do those, 2.5 months of leaf vacuuming?
So there are other communities that we could poll as far as how their costs are allocated. Generally, their contracts are set up so that there's a component for solid waste, there's a component for recycling, and there's a component for their yard debris. And some say yard debris and leaves, or leaves. And some define it differently as to what yard debris is. So if you can get it in a container, they dump it. If it's a pile of brush and sticks, they have standards, but you're going to find that vary all over the place. But there is a monthly cost depending on how they structured that particular program, but it's not going to be comparable. It's just all over the place.
But I think your question is a little different. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but our leaf collection, I thought, was in the operating expenditures of public service. And the solid waste 1.245 is the contract with, under sanitation, with the sanitation firm, correct?
Right, and they pick up sticks and things like that. They do pick up that. We also, in addition to that,
Right.
in addition on top of that,
That's
we vacuum the leaves ourselves, if the leaves are loose.
So the sanitation fee or the solid waste fee really goes to the line item in the sanitation section, correct?
Right.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify that.
Also, on the leaf processing facility that we have, when we first went through that and bought that land and did all the renovations and put that in, I remember the former manager saying that's a 10-year life of that facility. Do you know anything about that? Or Mayor, do you remember saying that was a 10-year life for that facility? And then where would we go? Is that true or not?
I don't know if it's true.
Well,
Yeah.
it was said.
Yeah.
So if it is.
In other words, the
that
facility has a
something
life
that
cycle.
happens, is there a life to a facility where in 8 years that facility is at its maximum use, and then what do we do?
So absolutely every facility has a life cycle.
So what is the life cycle for this?
I don't know that we have I wouldn't want to say that we have a definitive answer as to that. Todd is operating it as efficiently as possible. The factor there is how many people actually contribute to the yard debris or leaf program. If you mulch or rake them into the woods or dispose of them through your landscaper, that's going to extend the life cycle of that piece of property. If everybody finds it's easier just to pull them out or break them out to the curb and our volume goes up, it may decrease the length of it. But I don't know where the statement about 10 years necessarily came from. There's an acreage that's there, but part of a facility like that is really learning how to efficiently use the space that you have. And that's a learning process that staff is going through right now. You know, there's components about how quickly it's turned, how much space there has to be between piles, how much, how much water do we add to it or not add to it, the heat as it builds up and how that breaks it down. I think there was some discussion, and we've had some internal discussion about, some communities have said we're going to give it away or sell the mulch. There are pros and cons with how you approach that. Sometimes the mulch is clean, and sometimes it's not. So I think we need to operate it for several more years, and we'll have a better sense of where we're at. But it's going to be somewhat dependent on how it's utilized by the public as well.
But there is a life cycle to that property.
So solid waste has been an issue since 2008. It was $500,000 then. If you go back through some of the documents out on our website, in 2014, the then board identified, or 2013, the then board identified that with the $80 fee, that fee was only covering 19%. So you do the math. We've doubled and then some in 10 short years. So what you're proposing, fee or tax, is to shorten that gap, basically. I mean, that's in essence what you're suggesting. Solid waste is solid waste, and that gap has continued to increase. And it's by far and away our largest expenditure, single item expenditure. So that's why you're proposing it. Otherwise, we have no capital plan, or significantly reduced capital plan, because the money's got to be moved elsewhere. Correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Have you looked at any of these other options, like you've talked about, ways that the services can be scaled? Have we got any conversations going with this company about ways that we could reduce our cost?
So there were conversations that were had prior to the renewal of the contract last fall, I guess it was. Was it fall?
I think it was February.
February. The conversations took place in the fall. Conversations took place over the past 12 months. So.
Right, I
Do we
think the
have any
contract was
information
renewed.
on that? Do we have any information we can review on that? On the sort of options that were discussed, the ways services could be reconfigured?
I think that the general consensus at the time was to continue to provide the high-level service at the method it was provided. And there was discussion about, do you want to look at other options, and the answer was no.
Okay, but at the time you were also not proposing that we charge a fee to the public, so maybe we should be looking at what those options are before we make this decision.
Yeah, so we're under an existing contract for provision of the service, and that absolutely could be something that the board could look at for the future.
When does that contract expire?
5-year.
I'm sorry, what?
5 years?
5 years.
5 years.
5 years.
So we can't do anything to the level of services, we can't change anything for 5 years. That contract was negotiated and none of us were even involved in this for
No.
5 years?
A number of people were involved in it.
When did we approve the contract? February?
February, I believe.
I think that's a great company. I just would have liked to have this information. No, I think they're a great company. I just wish we could have talked about those things. So now we're stuck for 5 years.
But if we're cutting services, I mean, how happy would the people be if they no longer have the opportunity to dispose of their yard waste, if they dispose of their household items a couple times a year? I mean,
I don't know, how happy are they
Yeah,
going
I
to be
mean-
when we raise taxes on them?
I mean, yeah, input from the public would be nice, but there's nothing we can do.
Well, I
about
think we
that.
did get input. When we did the survey, that was one of the number one services that was rated. So, in fact, it was the top service that was rated.
And so,
So
I'm
the
sorry.
public weighed in. Now, it's a fair question to say, okay, we're going to have to cover that gap, and over the next year or two, we're going to have to figure out, do we can maintain that level of service? Because let me tell you, there isn't any one of us is going to go out there and say, tomorrow, we're going to cut this service. Because chief's going to have to bring every officer in at that point in time. It will get nasty. You do not take away solid waste. You can ask any political body across this state. You take away something they have, something like that, you better do it with a very thoughtful citizen engagement approach and not just an arbitrary decision real quick.
I don't want to
Say-
make any decision real
That,
quick.
well, that was
That's why I'm
my
asking for
question.
data.
So there has been input, and the people have said, we don't want to lose that
They
service.
said it was the highest rated service. The question wasn't asked, you want to lose it. It was the highest rated service.
And it's not a matter of lose it or have it. I was asking if there was information on scaling it.
I mean,
Well,
that
that-
would be how you would scale it, though, is cutting.
Is all or none?
No, that you would
That's not-
maybe just do the garbage and maybe recycling and not have,
Yeah.
I don't know. He said
Your-
there's lots of ways that
So,
other
and I-
towns do it.
And I think that's something that can be looked at, right, in terms of what are people scaling? That takes some time, but you can look at that, correct?
Sure. I mean, any service we provide is open to review and future discussion and service delivery changes. But that's a contract that's in place now. But absolutely.
So that's something that we can do throughout the year.
But he's saying with
Assess.
a contract for 5 years, so we, the board that's in this seat in 4 years can look at that.
Well, you can look at scalability and then re-enter negotiation. Those things take time. I don't know where those would go, but you can have a civil adult conversation with them in terms of, hey, we'd like to do it this way. And they'd have to see whether or not that they're amenable or not. I mean, they seem to be good to work with, right? I mean,
So can we do
Yeah.
that before we move forward with this?
You couldn't get that done that quick. That's just.
Well, I'm just saying, before we even consider that, to consider this fee, is this something that we can look at, maybe not this year or next year, and look at ways to scale or work with the company that we have in scaling some of the services?
Are you suggesting and then reconsider whether or not to do a fee in a year or two? Is that what you're talking
That's
about?
what I'm saying.
so, yeah, and I was answering, you can't get that scalability stuff done in this, for us to get the budget
Right.
done.
No, I'm not saying in this
that's-
budget cycle.
So,
Or we could also do the fee this year and then remove it next year like it's been done in the past.
those are options. So, tossed it around, Commissioner Burrow?
Again,
Up or-
I'll just say,
up or down?
we talk about regressive fees and so forth, but, all of us, no matter what our financial status is, pays the same for a gallon of gas or a gallon of milk or any necessity. And trash removal, in my mind, is a necessity, so I don't see it as a regressive tax. As I said before, if it costs $217 a year to service my house, I would be willing to pay for that as a necessity. And I don't think we want to we have a couple things in Waxhaw that are really done well. The police department and sanitation. And, our public works department and our police department. If you were to put a $217 fee on for sanitation, maybe you could reduce the property tax rate. To me, it's immaterial. We have to pay for what we get, and we're getting a very good service at a very competitive rate, and I don't feel compelled to brand it as a regressive tax.
So are you for or against?
I'm for the fee right now. I'd be for a $217 fee if necessary.
All right. Commissioner Westlake?
I have lived in the county before and had to pay for my own garbage before, and all it was garbage and recycling. We didn't get all the extra services that we're getting now. I also like how in the town, we all have our one trash day, we all have the same matching cans, and it's reliable, and the service is definitely worth it. And I know that if we paid this all on our own, like Fred said, Commissioner Burl said, it would be much higher. So I say, also because the fee is going directly for what it's being used for, rather than being a tax that could, again, be spread out. I think it's good to be able to see where your money's going, so I would say yes.
Commissioner Lee?
Anytime you're talking about a flat fee across incomes, it is regressive. It's very easy to sit in a fully paid-for home in a nice neighborhood and say that that's not regressive, but it is. You don't have to label it that way. The reality exists, whether we acknowledge it or not. I'm not in favor of this, no.
Commissioner Burns?
I still have concerns as far as future increase in this fee, because I can guarantee you to maintain the level that we have now in good services, as the price increases, I think that the fee will increase. And so based on that, I'm not for the $80.
Mayor Pro Tem McMillan?
I have concerns too with this fee and imposing this type of fee. I wish that we had the opportunity to review some options as far as services to possibly balance this out a little more. I understand that the need for solid waste and picking up your garbage, and I get that, but with the possibility also of the increase in the fee and not knowing what's going to happen with that, not knowing how we could balance that out a little better, I think that we need to really look at some options or work with the company or something and seeing that in the future and maybe revisit this in the budget next year. But moving forward this year, I think we need some more information or more options before I can agree to move forward with this type of fee.
So you're against.
I'm against.
So sanitation fees out, 3-2. What does that do now to the rest of the budget? What gets impacted?
The CIP program likely is the place to make up the difference, so.
CIP would go from,
A 650 contribution to less 210 or so, something like that. Is that correct, Lisa?
221?
221?
say it again, I'm sorry.
221, 221,000.
So what is that in a project? What are we cutting out?
It's just that contribution right now, though, right? So you're talking.
What are we not going to do?
That's your baseline contribution to the CIP program for year one. I wouldn't speculate as to what it would be for year two, but that would be your first year contribution. So there's not one single program that actually is tied to. It's the CIP program in its totality. The two projects that have been discussed as part of the first two CIP projects that we have listed are two things. One, the Public Services Facility and the YMCA or Kensington Soccer Field Complex. Soccer Field Complex is on schedule to go to the fall timeframe with construction. The Public Services Facility, we're still looking for a suitable piece of property, but those are the two that are early on in the 5-year program.
So basically, we would have to, if those projects were approved, we'd have to go out and borrow money.
Steve, can we take a break?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, why don't we take a quick 5-minute recess? And come back at this. Okay, Greg. Next up.
So the item that I think probably is in need of clarity, because we had comments and questions regarding kind of positioning, is the 34-acre property. And page 1 of the staff responses to questions shows a picture of a whiteboard in the building here, actually, where we spent a couple days working together in January. And there's a couple ones and a couple twos beside 4 items on that whiteboard. And I think there's a difference of opinion about what that means. And so what I would suggest is really we spend a little bit of time getting some clarity on it, because the thing that staff took away from it was that we had a facilitator, and we went through an exercise, and for better or for worse, we assigned colors and circles to projects, and for better or for worse, they are what they are, and we've got a 1 and a 1 and a 2 and a 2 beside 4 projects. That being said, one of the 4 has an impact on another of the 4, and that's the completion of the Parks and Rec Master Plan update. Has an effect on what we do on the 34-acre property. No value judgment on any of those, other than we definitely have a number 1 beside traffic mitigation and trying to address those issues associated with it. And I'm going to put my glasses on because this is kind of small. So improve traffic congestion was a number 1, and finish Park and Rec Master Plan was a number 1. The board addressed the Park and Rec Master Plan. That process is in place for a complete redo of it, and we've got a time schedule that's moving forward. The other 2 that are there, in this case, it's Waxhaw Marvin Park and completion of streets. We need some clarity on that. I would submit that there's no promise implied or made by any of those 4 items that are on the board about any one project. It doesn't say that we're going to spend money on them, or how much money, or when. But I think there does need to be some clarity. There are questions from both the board and the public as to what the priorities are. And so I think a discussion around what the priorities are going into the next budget would help. We can certainly amend any of these 4 things that are referred to in the budget message before we publish it in late June. But that would be healthy, in my opinion.
I'm fine with the priorities as they are.
Okay, Commissioner Westlake.
Okay, so what I am seeing just on this picture is 2 people saying that that was a priority, but 2 out of 6 is not a consensus. What we did have a consensus on was completing the Parks Master Plan. And we decided that whatever that turned out was how we would then move forward on what projects we were going to complete first through the Parks Plan. That it was not we were not going to be assigning any particular part to be done first. That we were going to do that based on how the plan came back. That was what I thought we had a consensus on.
I'm afraid you're wrong. That's not what we discussed. We clarified several times that while we want to get the master plan done, it does not in any way prohibit us from moving forward with the park. We clarified this again in the meeting where we passed the resolution to protect the land from sale, saying this does not in any way prohibit us from allocating funds and moving forward. For the record, what you are seeing there is 2 green lights put next to Waxhaw Marvin Park. That would be myself and Commissioner Burns. I see no other priorities here that got 2 greens. I see a tier 2 priority like the park with 3 yellows being complete the sidewalks. The only other thing I see on here, I see Let's finish the master plan we've already got. I see 1 green and a yellow, 2 yellows, 2 yellows and 2 reds. The only other thing that I see that's either 3 yellows or 2 greens is the park. The idea of a conservation easement or similar legal binding land preservation was also green-lit by myself and Commissioner Burns, and red-lit by the other 4 participating members in this activity, which would be the other 3 commissioners and the mayor. We have here, I think, a fair distribution of the priorities of this board as a whole. We don't have a 6-person board. We have a 5-person board. We have
No, we have a 6-person board.
Well, we
We
don't.
have
I'm
5
sorry.
people that vote.
We don't have a 6-person voting board.
We have a 6-person board with the town manager. We're a council manager form of government.
Yes.
And when it comes to voting, the 5 commissioners vote. And then now we're at a point, forget the screen, forget January. What Greg's simply asking, clarify, board, 5 voting members. Do you want Waxhaw Marvin Park on the list or off the list at this point in time?
I want it on the list.
Okay, one at a time.
I think we voted, if I'm not mistaken, in February. I believe the date was February 27th, when the board as a whole voted, and I think it was 5 people who voted at that time, stating we were going to take the town properties and encompass them in with the master plan update. We were not going to do anything as far as sale of the property, anything with the properties until we got the master plan back.
That is not what I'm sorry. Just, I think you have a misunderstanding.
As I was saying, we were going to incorporate the properties in with the master plan so that we could see exactly what the plan would come back with the Parks and Rec, include the Waxhaw Marvin Park, not do anything with that property until we got the information back, not leaving it as a separate entity, not allowing it to be touched, moved, or anything else until we completed the plan update. So we already voted on that in doing that. So it's not actually a separate item then. It would then go under completion of Parks and Recreation Master Plan with the other properties that the town has. And once that's completed, then we would move forward with whatever has to be done with those properties. So we voted.
That's not how I voted at the time.
It was a 5-0 vote.
Yes.
Okay,
At
so
which point I asked repeatedly.
hang on.
I apologize.
Right now, what we need to do is decide. Do we want it on the list or not?
Yes.
And let's just respectfully have that discussion. And there's a lot has happened from January to now, and everybody's got a view of that. Why don't we do my suggestion is let's do what Greg said and provide the clarity now. We get a chance to look at it now. Mayor Pro Tem.
We have it already on as a part of completion with the Parks and Recreation Master Plan update, where the land is not going to be moved, touched, or anything done with it until we get direction as to what we're going to do.
So not on this list.
It's in already with the master
But
plan.
it's not as a separate line.
No, it wasn't a separate item. We voted
Okay.
February 27th.
Okay. Commissioner Burns.
Going back to the retreat, well, let's go back to last year's retreat, where it was on our list last year when you first came on board, when we did the retreat, as a Waxhaw Marvin Park, or 34-acre park, whatever the title is. So nothing was done. There was no money allocated, or we just moved forward with the budget, saying we didn't have the money to do that in the last year's budget. So going to this retreat, we did this little exercise where it is 2 separate issues, just as the completion of streets and conservation easements are 2 separate. which is pretty much infrastructure and dealing with those things as a whole. So if we're going to look at this of separating this or removing one, then we can look at the same way and remove one of these, if that's the focus we're going to make on looking at this chart. Moving past this chart, my question in the retreat was to Mayor Maher, once we decided that we would have a resolution that the town would no longer involve sale of the property. And my question was, that doesn't mean that we could not move forward and do something before the master plan is coming through. And the answer was, sure, you can do whatever you want to do. When we came to the resolution that we voted on in January, the same question was, the board can make a decision, whatever they want to do, of moving forward with this park.
On any park, actually. The
Any
resolution was on any park.
resolution.
Could move forward.
Right. So I haven't heard a focus, or the focus being from the citizens on any other park inventory property except for this one. We have heard from the public in great numbers through the citizen survey. I believe that was, help me out, 1,000 citizen survey was?
1,800.
1,800?
18 or 14.
1,800 citizen survey came back, and one of the top 3 was parks and rec. We need a park. That's more people than vote in this town. And we have heard from the citizens a second time recently that they would like a park opened, that one particular piece of property. So to say that we don't have a particular plan in place as far as what we were talking about here, I think would be wrong. I think the intention was there to move forward. Now, there's one other thing that I think I was talking to Ms. Sabinski before the meeting today. And my question was, when we made that decision, it was based on having the park either opened if we could get a grant after the master park plan was done. And I'm seeing in this budget that there's no plans for any grants, any money allocated to do grants. Is that correct for this budget year?
You can't appropriate it until you're awarded, so no.
Right? So we're talking, if nothing is done this year in this budget, then, or allocated, and Commissioner Burrell even stated that if it isn't allocated, it doesn't happen. You have to allocate it to get it to happen. So I think this should stay. I think that was the intention. I think that we have heard from the people. We've heard from thousands of citizens. We're talking about hearing from citizens for the garbage or solid waste or increasing taxes. I don't think I've heard any more in the years that I've been on this board than advocate for parks. So I think it should stay.
Julie?
Let me start by saying, Commissioner McMillan, I owe you an apology. I should not have interrupted you. I let my passion take me away, and I am very sorry. That was unprofessional of me. I think we need to keep this on the list. It was never my intention to lump this under the master plan. I specifically asked Mr. Ferguson when we voted on that resolution to prevent discussions of sale of the property, does this prevent us from allocating funds? The answer I was told was no, you can allocate anything you want. I said, does this prevent us from spending allocated funds or developing a plan on our own for this property? The answer I was given was something to the effect of, no, you can allocate, you can move forward, you can do what you want. We will not allow outside entities to be involved with these properties until such time as the board makes a move to rescind that resolution. The U.S. Census I looked at today has some interesting numbers. There are 2016 estimates for children in this town, for persons up to and under 19 years of age. In 2016, was between 4,500 and 5,000 children then. And we have grown significantly since then. We need a park. Our people have been asking for it. As you have mentioned, and Commissioner Burrow mentioned, you're right, we have to allocate the money or it doesn't happen. Ms. Weselick mentioned, what is it that the people constantly complain about? The complaints I hear are, we need a park. I received almost somewhere in the neighborhood of 900 emails asking for petition signatures, asking for this park to be opened. To do otherwise, to sit on our hands, let alone to remove this from our priorities list, would be to fail this community in the thing that they're asking us for. We're going to sit here and vote to raise taxes, raise fees, and then say, and by the way, we don't prioritize giving you a park. I think that's reprehensible. I want this on the list. I want it funded this year.
Wesley?
Yes, the people said, number 3 in the survey, they wanted a park, and we are addressing that through the comprehensive the Parks Master Plan. The people, we are not saying we are not going to give them a park. We're just not saying right now which park is going to come first. And we just voted against a fee that we now are hearing is going to have to reduce our CIP funding. And now I'm wondering where we're thinking we're going to come up with money for this park anyways to put here as a goal when we're now having to reduce that fund. So I think we just stick to the original plan of the Parks Master Plan, see where that comes out, and the first park is where the need shows, and that we do not need to be specifying a specific property.
I think one of the hardest things we have to do as a board is to stay out of the weeds, stay at a high level of proposing policies, proposing procedures, and working on ordinances. I think to specifically have the Waxhaw Marvin property on the list is inappropriate. I think having the completion of the Parks and Recreation Master Plan is very appropriate. I think improving traffic congestion is very appropriate. I think talking about, specifically sidewalks is kind of borderline myself. What I don't see is where are we with an evaluation of all town properties? I mean, these are things to me that are germane to the board, that they are high level, they are not specific items. That's your job. We are a council manager form of government, and I don't want to pretend to do your job. If I do my job properly, you can do yours. If I don't do mine, so I would highly, I don't want to see the 34-acre parcel on this list as a budget priority. I would reinforce that the Park and Recreation Master Plan is very important, and it will show us where we need to concentrate our efforts first, second, third, and so forth. That's the work of this board. Thank you.
May I make a comment?
Can I make one first?
Absolutely.
Okay, so vote was 3-2 not to have it. I want to add a caveat. The comprehensive Parks and Rec Master Plan update needs to provide insight into, and we need to develop aggressively, a funding model. This town has a history of park promises and taken 10 years to finish them. Nesbitt Park, Town Creek Park. We don't have a funding model, and we're not going to save it by cutting budget. We're not going to get there. This is every time we try to analyze a park, we get cold feet because it's $3 million, $4 million, $5 million, whatever it is. we throw a little money at it, and then it just, we'll throw a little bit of money the next time and the next time, and here we are 12 years later with the park. We're just getting restrooms at Nesbitt Park. That's embarrassing. That's absolutely embarrassing when you consider we got 2,300 kids going through there every weekend. But we did that, not staff. We did that, and so I truly believe coming out of that Park and Rec Master Plan update, we quickly have to go into what the heck is the capital improvement plan to deliver on parks, so we can make a very tough decision on how we do it, because we have to give the community answers on how we're going to get there. That's my personal belief. Go ahead.
My last comment is this. We are working towards the master plan. We originally thought that was going to be a 6 to 7 month process. Now we're hearing 10 months. So we're talking about the results from this master plan will come in towards the end of this fiscal year we're budgeting for now.
Fiscal or calendar?
May, right?
December, I thought, right? Okay.
So
end of
pretty
this-
far through the fiscal year that we're budgeting. So again, my argument is we can do a minimal opening of this property while we wait, and then nothing we're talking about doing is a permanent structure. We're talking about what we need: a gravel parking lot, 2 paved spaces to be ADA compliant, and some porta potties. We can get that open and get 34 acres usable by the people, and then maybe that's all we prioritize. Maybe that report comes back and it says this park is a lower priority, we need to focus on this part of town or this part of town. And maybe that's enough, and we don't get any more phase 2, phase 3, phase 4 done on that for another 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. But we would have accomplished something in the meantime for the people. We would have given them something they could use. Or we can decide to do nothing and wait another year and do nothing.
I don't think we're making a choice to do nothing, sorry. I think we're making a choice to follow good planning practice to do a Park and Rec Master Plan. And if it comes back and it says, the number 1 place is here, the number 2 place is here, and so forth, we have, as Steve said, thrown money at the corner lot, not this board here, but prior boards, spent a whole lot of money developing that as a town hall. Where's that money now? It's gone. We spent money trying to develop the 10-acre Horton property. Where's that money now? It's gone. It's wasted. I'm not going to be a part of wasting any money until we know what we are going to do and we have a way to fund it, as the mayor said. That's how this board needs to function. We're not here to make everybody happy all the time. We're here to do the business of the town in a professional and in a financially responsible way.
We need parks. That's a given. And I'm in agreement with the fact that we do need parks. So I am not against parks. And in speaking to people, yes, people from the Waxhaw Marvin side have been more vocal, but the people who have lived here all their lives are also vocal. The people who are on the east side, who are across the tracks on the south side, who have no recreation facilities, who have no amenities, who have no clubhouses, who have no place to go, who have no sidewalks to even walk on. They have been waiting for years. They have been promised for years. The property that's next to the cemetery down there that was given, the acres of land over there, the acres of land on Given Street, not to identify or to say that that's where the park should be, but underneath the Parks and Recreation Master Plan will identify exactly where the need is for the people that should be opened up. Just as we did not want to decide as to what type of charities that we wanted to give to or donate money to, how are we going to decide that one park is better for people to use or should be open first as opposed to other lands and for people who don't even have any type of amenities or facilities or anything to go to. But if we put it in with the Parks and Rec Master Plan, as we stated, and not do anything with the land, but develop it, draw out a plan, do the grants proposal that's necessary to follow up, to get the proper money, to get the proper funding, to get the proper needs and uses, and put everything in place so that we can do that, hopefully within the next year, which should be a goal that we should work towards doing an opening for everybody to use, not just for some, but for everybody, because that's what the park should be for. So if we already did that on February 27th and said we were going to put it in with the Parks and Rec Master Plan, let it stay there. Let it do that. Let's follow through with the plan. Let's follow through what we agreed to do and get the parks that we need open for the people, but do it for all the people so that everybody can enjoy, and the people who don't have can have. The people who have been living here and have been waiting just as everybody else are also just as important, and we need to consider them as well.
So the one thing that's pretty interesting out of this, all 6 board members are unanimously in agreement that we need to address parks. So let's build from that place and figure out how we're going to move forward aggressively. I didn't hear anybody up here say they were against parks. How we get there is going to be a challenge. I'll tell you, we can't lose sight of the fact, I have the utmost respect for the board in 2011, 2012, 2013 that had the foresight to purchase property and try to build parks without a park and rec department. They left the opening of the park and rec department into the 2014, 2015 board, and that's just coming up. We're in a great spot, maybe call me Pollyanna, but we're in a great spot to take under Dina's leadership, to take a Park and Rec master plan and actually get a funding model that's actually going to make some progress. I think we should all feel pretty good about that, even if we have some differences here as to what goes first and what goes second and all that. So, Commissioner Burns.
I just want to go back several years back to the Parks and Rec when we were looking at the Horton property. We wasted, as Commissioner Burrell said, we wasted $40,000 on a consultant for a proposed $7 million park that had everything in it except for a space for the people to stand. There was so much involved and put into that 10-acre park. So we scaled it back, and it came forward, I think, in 2014 or 15, down to $4 million proposal. That never went through. We scaled it back down in 16 to $1 million. And the time and the money that was wasted, and we could have had the Horton Park open. I don't want that to happen again. We need to make a decision. We need to listen to the people, and putting it off and putting it off and putting it off again, we're right back where we were with the Horton property 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago. Money wasted and nothing.
Respectfully, I was on the Parks and Rec committee when the Horton property came in. The original proposal was for a $700,000 park, and it grew from there. And it grew from there. Hindsight's always 20/20, but through a series of meetings over at the Museum of the Waxhaw, they let every citizen participate in there, and went from $700,000 to $8 million with a train track and trains and a passive park and this park and that park and all that stuff, and the town collectively let it get out of hand. So to your point, we can't let any of this stuff get out of hand. We need a crisp Park and Rec master plan and a very targeted plan and very targeted funding model, priorities, everything. We can't let this stuff get out of hand like that did. It was very, very painful to say to the board, hey, here's a $700,000 park, and throw it open to, let's study it again, let's study it again, let's study it again. To your point, and it grew to $8 million at that point.
It did, and my fear is this board changes in 18 months. There's 3 open seats. We have no idea who's running. We have no idea who's going to be elected. That board could come in and say, we don't want any parks at all. This is a responsibility, and it's on our shoulders to give the people in this town what they wanted in the next 18 months.
And we-
Because it may not happen in 18 months. And the timeline that I'm looking at right now with 9 months for the, the money, and then a funding process, and 9 or 10 months or December for the master park plan to come back, I can see this, as it has in the past, going through to another board, and there we are.
If we make a
That's all I
conscious,
have to
if we make a conscious effort as a board to do this and to get this Parks and Rec master plan done, if we make a conscious effort with the Parks and Rec committee, and if we make a conscious effort in moving forward with the grants proposal and the writing and everything else that is needed, and moving forward with that and not waiting on that to start moving forward with that process, then we can have that process in place and looked at and dealt with by this time, hopefully next year. We should not have to keep coming back year in and year out. We can take the steps needed and move forward with those steps by that time, to have these things in place, moving forward, and make sure that we do that so that we can have this and have the information, get the grants in place, so that we can start opening up some of the land that we have and using it for the people who live here. It shouldn't take another 10, 12 years to have this done. We can get this done. If you have the people, you have the resources, you have the knowledge, you have the information, and we're stating we want it done, we can get it done.
So Greg, on that note, you were saying, what would you repeat what you said about the grants? Putting in for the grants, you can't allocate the money until you've received the grant?
And there's no guarantee
We
you're
have
going to
no
get,
allocation of money for
there's
grants.
no guarantee you're going to get a penny of grant money.
But you have to apply,
You've got to apply to
and
be
you got to fill
eligible.
out the forms to do so. That's what we need to start working on and looking at, is the application process, the applying process, and the looking into what is needed to get that funding and that money. We have the information and resources that we can look at to do that, and that's what we need to do.
Are we going to start applying for grants now, or are we waiting on the master plan?
There's a time frame for grants, and the grant period will open up in May or April of next year. Is that right?
Part of the grant is May, that's with the
Next, that's a year.
we can start working on potential grants in the future. We need that document, master plan document, to go with the grants.
Some of the grants that you use or some of the grants that you can get are the money and funding. Through COG, it's been stated, as long as you are in the process of getting that master plan in place and they see that you are working towards that, there are grants and monies that you can still apply for in that process, as long as you are presenting that information. Is that correct?
As long as you're working on it, and when you're turning it in, you have it ready to turn it in.
Right. You can do that.
Do it at the same time.
Yes.
You have to have the plan with the documentation when you turn it in.
Is that for the standard grants that we've been getting as a town, or is that for the one you were talking about in the retreat, the $500,000 matching grant?
The part of the grant is the North Carolina grant that you have to match, okay? The LWCF is the federal grant that you have to do a match as well. In the past, I've matched them together to help bring more our community to the park. So you have to have a current, updated master plan for any of those big funded, sources. The smaller sources, like 50,000 or less kind of thing, we can do with the part, the master plan we have right now. But the big, we have to have a comprehensive plan.
All right, so in your background and experience, Dina, what are the chances of us getting a $500,000 grant the first time we apply? Percentage-wise?
The more points you have on your application, the better your chance to get the grant.
But in your opinion, what is our chances the first time around?
First time around is challenging.
Thank you.
That's for the larger grants, but if we go for the smaller grants, and there are a number of smaller grants that we can also go towards to start working and building up that money and those resources, we can apply for those as well moving forward and get that money too. And that's a lot easier than the larger funded grants that you're trying to get, or the matching funded grants that you're trying to get, to work towards building from those smaller grants and getting that money.
Yes, you can have a number of grants go with one project. Is that what you're asking?
Right, so you can apply, so you're talking about the larger grants and the matching funded grants, but there are also an additional, there are a lot of resources with other monies that's out there that are smaller funds that you can also apply for with the plan that we have now and get those those funds, if that are available out there, and apply them to things that we need now.
So for example, the playground grant, that was used on a smaller scale. That was, to build kind of thing. I'm not sure exactly.
There are smaller funded grants.
Grants, yes, for smaller pieces.
Right.
Of the puzzle.
Of the puzzle, to help put the puzzle together and start getting money allocated.
So,
That's what we can work towards doing.
After
So-
the plan or before the plan?
so everybody pause a minute, because Greg, I think you want
You can
to say.
get the monies and put that in
Does it have
place.
to
So-
be
for a
specified, or does it
No,
have to just
it
go to
can
your
just go
town?
into the Parks and Recreation plan, so that the money can come in.
Non-specific?
So might I suggest that we give that to the experts and staff to tell us exactly how that could work, or if it can work, what we need to have in place, do you even have the staff to fill out the grants? Is that included in the budget, in that halftime person, a full-time grant writer? I mean, I think there's some steps here that we have to get our arms around, and you got to come back and tell us, hey, if this is where we want to go, this is the budget shift you have to make in terms of making sure we allocate the resources to go there. Because I'm struggling with how you can get money when you don't have a project defined. Okay. And so we got to get to some of those places, but we don't have enough. We can't decide that tonight. But you're hearing very strongly from the board, how do we accelerate it? And so that's an activity that we would graciously pass to you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to just make a couple clarifications. Grants are great if you qualify for them and if you can find matching money. But there's always skin in the game. And there's very little free money out there that doesn't have a match or skin in the game. There are smaller grants, Kaboom, other programs for playgrounds, things like that. But you've got to have the infrastructure, the roadways, the parking, the land in place. And yeah, there's $25,000 here. There could be $100,000 for some sort of special needs playground equipment. There's different things out there. But generally, you have to have a plan, you have to have infrastructure, you've got to have the space, and it's a small component of an overall piece of property that functions as a park, and the overall cost might be $2 million. All that to say, do not believe that you can operate and build and address park needs with grants. They will play a role at a certain time and place. What Dina did not say about Pardiff, which is the leading contender for significant dollars in North Carolina, you're eligible to apply for $500,000. You're required to match that $500,000 if you are awarded. If you go back and look at what gets awarded in North Carolina, they don't always award $500,000. They also do not award it to the projects always that get the highest number of points. At the end of the day, there is a political component in how those projects are awarded, and it might be based on the voter perceptions of your wealth as a community. It might be based on their perception of how frequently you're awarded the grant or what your need is in your community. So there's a lot of things that play into it. You might get a good to very good score on the consultant side or on the points, but still not be awarded, because that's happened where communities checked all the boxes. They were adding multiple new components, and that gets you more points. So if you're adding a walking trail and you're adding tennis courts and you're adding racquetball, tennis, you're going to get extra points if your community doesn't have those particular activities. But that doesn't mean that that park's going to necessarily score enough to get rated, and then it also means that the political voting process might favor somebody else. So again, don't go into a park capital planning process thinking that that's going to be really the way to carry the ball forward. It's going to be a small portion of things that we can do over time, and we will do, but it's not something that you can count on.
Well, that's why I was asking you, Greg, about a phasing, and I know there's no phasing plan, but I'm thinking a phase, just like the ideas of phasing the road projects over a period of time, but waiting and depending on a grant that we may not get, and a new board in 18 months with the time, not knowing how their feelings will be, or the majority of the board. I just think this board needs to come up with a funding plan and move forward, not depending on maybe we might get a grant, and give the people back what they've asked for. Give them back some of their tax dollars that they've been spending. They've spent $1.5 million, maybe $2-3 million that were spent, maybe $4 million on all of the properties that were bought in 2013. That's the taxpayers' dollars. It's been sitting for 5 years. Nothing's been done. The corner lot, something's been done, but like Commissioner Burrell said, we lost a lot of money on that. That was supposed to be a town hall. I'm just saying, and I'll end with this, is when the taxpayers and the people and the citizens have asked for something as much as they have asked for this, starting with the citizen survey and other issues, and online, whoever reads their Facebook things, I know what they're asking for. We all do. It's time for us to step up to the plate and give back to the people something that they're asking for, and this park is something that is a win-win for everybody in this town. That's all I have to say.
But how do you expect to pay for it is the thing. I mean, like I said earlier, you all just voted against $429,000 that is now going to have to come out of the CIP. So I don't know where this money is going to come from right now.
Motion to adjourn.
Yeah, so one quick thing. Greg, I'll get together with you tomorrow to revise our follow-on work session discussions on the budget, because I think there's more questions here, but we're tapped out time-wise and energy-wise before the public hearing. So with that, I think everybody's ready to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All those in favor?
Aye. Now comes